This is the story of two sisters, Mary Campbell and Jessica Tate, the main characters of the groundbreaking 70s sitcom Soap. When Soap first aired, there had never been anything like it. A half-hour comedy with a continuing weekly story about the world's most dramatic family. It tackled taboo topics like adultery, religion, and race. Nothing was off-limits for this show, including frank talk about sex.
What is horny?
Murders.
According to the coroner's report, the victim was stabbed, shot, strangled, suffocated, and bludgeoned.
And still he looks so peaceful.
Cults.
Reverend Sun is the ruler of the universe.
Big job.
Nymphomaniacs.
I'm an oversexed tart.
Ninjas.
Your daughter is being trained to become a ninja empress.
Aliens.
He has not had sex in 2,000 years.
And a demon baby.
The baby, he's possessed.
It's ridiculous!
But one of the most controversial elements? It was the first successful American sitcom with a gay character in the main cast, which touched off a huge fight before the first episode even aired. On one side were gay activists afraid that the show would paint a target on gay people in real life. And on the other side, arch conservatives who wanted total control of the airwaves. These two groups were diametrically opposed, and in the spring of 1977, there was only one thing they could agree on. Soap was a show that can never be allowed to air. Hey, I'm Matt Baum, I make videos about pop culture, and this time I want to tell you the story of Soap, the most controversial sitcom in TV history.
The show you've heard about all summer will keep you talking this fall.
It all started in the fall of 1976. ABC announced it was developing a satire of soap operas, a sitcom that would take the stock characters and storylines of soaps and exaggerate them with the added twist of incorporating edgy, controversial topics, along with sitcom-style comedy. There had been a handful of shows that satirized soap operas or tackled edgy topics in the past, but this one was poised to push the envelope further than any of those shows ever had. So, who was responsible for this explosive program? Two struggling producers and their writer friend who came up with the idea around a kitchen table. The producers were Paul Thomas and Tony Witt, and they had been working on other people's shows for years, mostly TV shows and movies of the week that weren't exactly hits, like Occasional Wife and Here Come the Brides and Satan's Triangle. These projects weren't exactly failures, but the movies tended to not be reviewed very well, and the shows usually didn't last more than a season or two. Tony and Paul were looking for a hit, a show of their own that would make a name for them, and that's when they met an up-and-coming writer who would catapult all of them to fame, Susan Harris. And by the way, a lot of these behind-the-scenes details come from the book Soap by A.S. Berman. There's a link to that in the description. Susan Harris was a recently divorced single mom when she started writing for TV in order to support herself and her 2-year-old kid.
Well, at first I thought I was going to be a serious writer, but I couldn't. But every time I put anything down, it was funny.
She'd done a few episodes of The Partridge Family and Love American Style, and then got some attention for breakthrough episodes of All in the Family and Maude. In particular, a very controversial two-parter where Maude gets an abortion.
I'm leaving. I think you want to be alone with Walter.
I don't want to be alone with that man again as long as I live.
This was a tough time for a woman to make a career as a writer on TV, but Susan was tough too. She told one reporter that the first time she met Norman Lear on All in the Family, he sized her up and said, "Nobody can look like you and write." She told him, "That's an appropriate remark for a man doing a show about a bigot." Susan, Tony, and Paul met in the early 70s, and they got along great. They used to sit around Susan's kitchen table at work, keeping an eye on her son Sam, and they'd come up with ideas for shows that they could make. One of the shows, a sitcom called Faye, actually made it to air in 1975. Finally, it seemed like this could be their big shot. And then it was canceled after just 3 weeks. Susan was furious, and she stormed an executive meeting at NBC to curse out the programmer in charge. Newspaper accounts from the time hinted at her using 10 and 12-letter expletives in the outburst, which became legendary around NBC's Burbank offices. Once she'd given them a piece of her mind at NBC, Susan went back to the drawing board to come up with something new for another network, ABC.
Susan had expressed the interest to want to do a show that was not in the ordinary fashion of that beginning, middle, and end 23 minutes. And she was kicking around the idea of trying to do a serialized show, a soap opera type show, comedy, in prime time.
We came up with the idea of two families, and then the characters came out of that.
At the time, soap operas were wildly popular, watched by 70 million Americans every day. Tony, Paul, and Susan started to wonder, what if we took the ongoing storyline format of a soap, tackled groundbreaking topics like on All in the Family, wrapped it up in Susan's flair for comedy and poignancy? Susan loved that idea, especially since it was a way to slip more serious messages onto television.
The first job was to entertain, and then I was always looking for something more, something to say, to express myself. And comedy is a less threatening way to deliver messages to audiences.
ABC loved the idea too, and work got underway with an expected premiere in the fall of '77. They started cooking up a multi-season story about two sisters with complicated families. There was infidelity, crime, a nympho daughter, and a gay son.
I couldn't believe it. I was seeing and hearing and reading. It was the most controversial sitcom it turned out to be in the history, I think, of sitcoms.
That's Marsha Posner Williams, who started out on Soap as an assistant producer and worked her way up to associate producer.
Everything about it was groundbreaking because nobody was doing it but us.
But things soon got complicated. A reporter from Newsweek named Harry Waters got wind of this controversial new series that ABC was planning, and he published an expose labeling Soap as impure. Harry leaked the most salacious details from the first few episodes. A promiscuous woman would seduce a priest in church. A gay man would date a pro football player. All the characters were having sex with each other. Some of this was true, some was exaggerated, but readers were outraged about the sexual elements, about the religious elements, about the gay elements. You name it, someone was offended. And by the spring of 1977, there were countless articles and newsletters and community group meetings about what to do about the show Soap.
There are people who think that the way they think should be the way everybody thinks. And that, unfortunately, that caused a lot of controversy.
Remember, nobody had even seen the show at this point. It wasn't scheduled to air for months, but there was already discourse, and various groups decided Susan Harris was public enemy number one. As one minister said in response to the Newsweek article, "We don't have to see the show to know it's indecent." As battle lines were drawn, two main groups emerged as the primary opponents to Soap: far-right conservatives and gay media activists. On the conservative side, one of the main opponents of the show was a man named Donald Wildman. Until a few years earlier, Donald had been an obscure Mississippi preacher. He'd written a few self-help books, and he was pastor of a church with about 75 members, but in his autobiography, he said he was bored with such a small congregation and felt like, quote, a monkey in a cage. Until one night in 1976, when Donald was watching TV and he had a brainstorm about how to get some attention. That year, there had just been a huge national controversy over sex and violence on TV, and Wildman realized he could piggyback off of that to get some publicity for himself. So he created a group called the National Federation for Decency in June of '77, and he organized a national Turn Off the Television Week in July. Soap came along just as this was happening, and it was a golden opportunity for him. Wildman started courting newspapers to denounce the show. He organized churches to oppose it, and soon Soap had been condemned by the National Council of Churches, U.S. Catholic Conference, LA Catholic Diocese, Christian Life Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, the United Church of Christ,
and Methodists!
The religious-backed Clean Up Soap Coalition sent out 45,000 packets to their followers with stickers for them to put on their TVs to remind them not to watch dirty shows. Soap had inadvertently given Donald something he'd always craved: a target to attack and a way to get famous.
Here I am from Mississippi thinking I could influence the networks.
We at CBS see in Mr. Wildman's coalition perhaps the greatest assault on intellectual freedom that we have witnessed in many years. The efforts of the coalition are only half a step removed from book burning.
They call me a bunch of names. They call me Hitler. They call me McCarthy. That ain't bad for a country preacher from Mississippi.
But conservatives weren't the only ones up in arms about Soap. On the other side of the aisle, gay groups were worried about reports that the show's family would include a gay son, and they had good reason to be nervous. For the last few years, public sentiment about queer people had slowly been improving. The first pride parades had been taking place, homosexuality was no longer officially considered a mental illness, and a handful of towns had passed first-in-the-nation civil rights laws that made it illegal to fire or evict someone for being gay. But Soap had activists worried. At the time, TV shows had a way of painting queer characters in a pretty negative light. For example, some recent episodes of Marcus Welby had portrayed gays as predators, killers, and mentally ill. And these were just one-off guest characters. If Soap had a gay guy in the main cast, activists were afraid that the show would cement more negative attitudes in the public's mind, just as sentiment had been starting to improve. And they were particularly sensitive because of a bruising fight earlier that year. In January of '77, Miami had passed a groundbreaking non-discrimination law that protected queer people in jobs and housing. Conservatives were furious about that, and a beauty queen and Florida Orange spokesmodel named Anita Bryant spearheaded a campaign to overturn the law.
The seed of sexual sickness that germinated in Dade County has already been transplanted by misguided liberals in the U.S. Congress.
For months, Bryant had been giving interviews and running TV commercials accusing queer people of being a threat to the public, indecent, harming children.
But in San Francisco, when they take to the streets, it's a parade of homosexuals, men hugging other men, cavorting with little boys.
And her campaign was successful. In June of '77, Anita convinced voters in Miami to overturn the new civil rights law.
The overwhelming defeat yesterday of the homosexual rights ordinance in Dade County, Florida, seems to have made the issue and the fight even more national in scope than before.
Victorious, Anita promised to bring more anti-gay campaigns to towns across the country.
We will prevail in our fight to repeal similar laws throughout the nation, which attempt to legitimize a lifestyle that is both perverse and dangerous.
Gay activists were terrified that soap would further entrench negative views about gay people on a massive national platform, playing right into Anita's hands and jeopardizing civil rights nationwide. Ronald Gold, an organizer with the National Gay Task Force, said, "In light of the Anita Bryant campaign, this kind of thing is political murder." Gay community groups started planning to protest and boycott ABC. Now the network was starting to get nervous. They brought in a gay consultant named Newt Dieter. He'd worked on several other TV shows, and he even helped defeat some network censors a few years earlier. You can check out my video about Barney Miller for that story. Newt told ABC that there was indeed a problem with their gay character. The gay character was too passive, Newt said. They needed to make him assertive, a militant gay liberationist who didn't take abuse and harassment, but answered back and always came out on top. If they made that change, Newt said, gay audiences would be satisfied. One of Newt's colleagues was a little less gentle with ABC. Media activist Ginny Vita told the network, "Unless changes are made in the portrayal of the gay son on the series, you're going to have the gay community down your corporate necks in a way you've never experienced." The timing for all this couldn't have been worse for ABC. Executives had a brewing PR nightmare on their hands, just as their PR department was about to go on strike for the summer. The network had to respond to the public outcry, but how? Well, first, they locked down the cast and crew, barring everyone from doing interviews. Total secrecy on the set. Next, they screened a test pilot of the show for local station managers in May of 1977 to try to calm their fears. But that backfired. The affiliates came away terrified. The Chicago Tribune's TV critic said the pilot was sex-drenched and kinky, and the most oversexed program ever on TV. Protests began in earnest right outside ABC's production offices, and staffers were nervous.
All of us who had offices that faced the street at that time, we had to keep our curtains closed because there were protesters. Even though we were on the second floor, we were afraid somebody was going to throw a brick through our window.
After seeing the pilot, one station manager said, "We'll probably get a bomb threat a week." And just for some context, in the 1970s, bombings were a lot more common than they are now. Violent protest was a real concern. So ABC tried again. This time, the head of the network, Fred Silverman, delivered a video message to all the local ABC stations in July. He told them that the reaction was overblown, and that once people saw the show, they'd say it was no big deal. But just to be safe, they would reshoot certain scenes to tone down the controversial content. ABC also leaked a bunch of notes from the censors to show how much stuff they'd take out. The reshoots and edit would remove a bunch of slurs, like fruitcake. They'd remove blasphemous phrases like, "oh my god." There were notes to desexualize certain jokes, like, "have the secretary dump the coffee somewhere other than her boss's lap." And my favorite of the censors' notes, on page 5, delete the slut.
Delete the wife.
Susan, Tony, and Paul wrangled with ABC censors over exactly what would change.
In several scenes in all TV shows, look, we'll trade you 2 hells for 1 damn.
I dug up some details about the jokes that ABC made soap cut, and I'll be posting bonus videos with those and more of my interview with Marcia over at patreon.com/mattbaum. So eventually, soap made enough changes that some of the protesters started to calm down. But then Fred Silverman said something that got them upset again. On the call, he told station managers, "Jody, the homosexual man, is going to meet a girl and find out there are other values worth considering." That was welcome news to Donald Wildman and conservatives, who saw that they had successfully pressured ABC into giving them what they wanted. But gay groups were livid. Silverman seemed to be saying that soap would show Jody getting cured of homosexuality, playing right into one of Anita Bryant's talking points.
There is hope for the homosexuals that if they're willing to turn from sin the same as any individual, that they can be ex-homosexuals the same as there can be an ex-murderer, an ex-thief, or ex-anybody.
Gay groups resumed their threat of a boycott. Ginny Vita at the National Gay Task Force sent ABC a letter explaining just how deeply the network had messed up, concluding, "We are experts on what is offensive to gay people. You are not." Time was running out before the scheduled premiere. ABC's best chance was to convince all of the various angry groups to hold off on a boycott until the reshot, re-edited show premiered, and as the September premiere approached, it felt like a tense standoff. Conservatives on one side, gays on the other, ABC caught in the middle along with Susan, Tony, and Paul. Finally, the day the premiere came, the culmination of all the work that Susan had put in and all the fighting between various groups. By this point, a bunch of sponsors had fled, like Datsun and Revlon and Volkswagen. The only sponsors that stuck around were a watch company and Vlasic Pickles. 19 stations refused to carry the pilot. 64 waited until the middle of the night to put it on the air. But at last, America got to see what all the fuss was about. The show began with a parental advisory, which was extremely rare back then.
Soap is a continuing adult character comedy. Certain dialogue and situations may not be suitable for all members of the family.
And by the way, that clip and many others come from Stephen Capsuto's YouTube channel. He has a ton of great moments from TV history there. Check out the link to that in the description of this video. The pilot introduces the Tates, a rich family in which the father, Chester, is cheating on his wife, Jessica. Jessica's sleeping with her tennis coach, one of their daughters is such a prude she's never seen herself naked, and the other daughter is sleeping with the tennis coach too. Meanwhile, Jessica's sister Mary is married to a man who, unbeknownst to anyone else, killed her first husband. Mary has one son who's trying to get out of the mob, another son who's gay, and a long-lost stepson who turns out to be the tennis coach. I know, it's a lot to take in.
That's what she said.
Critics weren't impressed. "Not all that suggestive, sexy, amoral, or even that funny," said one. "A prolonged dirty joke," said the LA Times. But viewers loved it. 18 million people tuned in, and ratings stayed high over the next few weeks. The show was daring and bold and very funny. One of the most groundbreaking things about the show is that nearly a decade before the Golden Girls, soap would have scenes where women sat around a kitchen table eating cake and talking openly with each other about sex.
And it was extraordinary for the time to say, "Oh, Mom, you're not, fidgety, you're just horny."
I think you're horny.
What is horny?
Oh my gosh, who says that back in the 70s? We did, and so proud of it.
And strangely enough, after the premiere, both conservative groups and gay groups claimed victory. Conservatives said that ABC had scaled back the raunchy content, just like they demanded. Gay groups said the gay character wasn't as offensive as they'd feared, and both said they'd hold off on protesting for now. One wrong step, though, and boycotts from either side could be back on at a moment's notice. So for the time being, the show is off to a cautiously promising start. But then there was a new wrinkle with Jody, the gay character, played by an up-and-coming young comedian named Billy Crystal. Today we know Billy for playing Mike Wazowski in Monsters, Inc., or hosting the Oscars, or for holding the record to this day for the fastest win on the game show Pyramid. But back then, Billy was just a little-known stand-up comic who'd mostly performed in live venues, not at all a household name. By the mid-70s, he had a wife and a newborn and realized he needed to settle down and support his family, so he decided to give Hollywood a shot. By a stroke of luck, Billy happened to be performing at a comedy club when Michael Eisner, then a VP of programming at ABC, was in the audience, and soon Billy was signed to a development deal. Jody was one of the first roles he was offered, and he was intrigued by the possibilities.
If we did it right, we could make a change in the way that gay people were looked at on television, and maybe if that worked the way we think it can work, that it's a very positive thing for the world.
But he was also pretty nervous about this being the first TV role in which most people would see him. Playing a gay character was a risky move in 1977, and he was worried about getting typecast. At the time, he said, "Is this how I want my career to start? I didn't want to go down in the annals of TV history as the bionic fairy." Ironically, Billy's next role after soap was in a World War II movie entitled Enola Gay. Anyway, before he'd take the role of Jody, Billy wanted to meet with Susan Harris for weeks to talk about how he wanted to play the character. He wanted to make sure it wouldn't be a one-note joke or an offensive stereotype. Susan assured him there was a lot of potential for the character to be much deeper than that.
If I could do this right, that would have, it's important. And I so trusted the creative group that I said, okay, I'll do it.
But the first few episodes had made him nervous. Characters would direct slurs and abuse at Jody, and the character was written to just smile and take it.
Go away from the fruit.
Here, Tinkerbell.
Now sissy starting in.
He was also unhappy that the character had so little depth. He played into easy stereotypes like constantly primping in mirrors and wearing his mother's dress.
My wig, my necklace, my best dress. Oh, you wear that belted.
Billy felt the show was setting up the gay character as, in his words, a buffoon.
What Susan wrote initially was more a stereotype, and I was uncomfortable with it.
In those initial episodes, Billy said that he could hear the studio audience laughing, not along with the jokes, but derisively at heartfelt lines about one man loving another.
And we had scenes where we told each other we loved each other. And you could, in front of a live audience, and I could feel them laughing and squirming in their seats. And at some points I wanted to stop and go, what is your problem? Do you folks have a problem? To the audience.
And at first, viewers responded to the character with overwhelming hostility. Billy started getting harassed in real life. At one point, he was at an airport and a bunch of teenagers started following him around, yelling, "There's the fairy." People yelled slurs at him out in public. When he went to meetings at ABC, he said, "You could feel people deal with you differently." In one interview, Billy said that the last straw was how people would walk up to him and whisper, "Hey, you aren't what they say you are you?" He said, "I wanted to shout at them, yeah, what if I am? I made up my mind that something had to be done." So he went to Susan Harris, who was writing every episode of the show, and told her about what he was experiencing and what he wanted to change. His suggestions were very similar to Newt Dieter's. He wanted to deepen the character, make him more than just a one-off gay joke, and try to get the audience on Jody's side instead of just making fun of him. In a later interview, Billy said, "I wanted Jody to come to grips with his homosexuality the way the majority of gay people have come to grips with their homosexuality. They don't see it as a problem, and I didn't want Jody to see it that way either." Susan had faced stereotypes too, as someone who was dismissed as a writer because she was a woman, and to her credit, she listened to him. You can see a major shift in how Jody is treated early in the first season, starting with the scene where Jody tries to come out to his macho older brother Danny.
Danny, it's no joke. I'm gay.
You never quit, do you?
At first, Danny tries to deal with it by pretending it's not true.
Face facts, will you, Danny? I'm a homosexual. It's the truth. I'm gay.
Hand me those pants.
But then he shifts over the course of the scene, dropping the denial and confessing his true feelings to his brother.
Danny,
you are not gay. You are not gay. I don't want you to be gay, and you're not, so shut up and hand me those shirts.
The scene culminates in a tense moment where it seems like Danny might reject his gay brother. But then Jody makes an important point.
Hey, I'm still the Jody who plays tennis with you. I'm still the Jody who bowls with you. I'm still the Jody who laughs with you, and I'm still the Jody who counts on you.
You're probably not gay.
I am. And it shouldn't make any difference. And if it does and you don't love me now because of it, then you've never loved me at all.
There had seldom been anything like this on TV before. A scene about how a gay character could still be the same person that his family has always loved.
I was afraid if I ever heard it, I couldn't look at you again.
Well, can you?
Yeah.
Friends?
Are you kidding?
The storyline of Jody resulted in us getting letters from parents who said, "I get it now about my child. Thank you for opening my eyes." That made it all worthwhile. Everything. Every bit of heartache that we might have gone through with the protesters or every negative that we would hear, those letters meant everything. And I was so proud that we were responsible for that.
From there, Jody's storyline takes a bit of a twist. Jody's boyfriend is Dennis, a famous and closeted football player. Times being what they are, Jody and Dennis have to keep their relationship secret because it would destroy Dennis's career if people knew that he was dating a man.
I mean, if people found out I was a...
Homosexuals! All right, I'm sorry.
Jody comes up with a solution.
Sex change operation.
Which one of us?
Now, this is where things get a little confusing, because in one scene, the dialogue suggests that Jody only wants to live as a woman in order to marry Dennis.
Listen, Dennis, I'm here becoming a girl for you.
But in other scenes, it's something Jody's always wanted.
I should be a woman. I've always felt like a woman.
And in other scenes, Jody continues to identify as a gay man.
It's because I'm gay, right, Bert? I mean, you hate me because I'm gay, right?
I guess if you need a reason, that's a good one.
So what's going on here? Well, it seems like soap's falling into a common misconception of the time about the difference between a person's gender and their sexual orientation. I spoke to author and historian Dr. Susan Stryker about how many TV shows and movies in the late 70s misunderstood trans characters.
There was a tremendous conflation of gayness and
transness. And transness, particularly male to female transsexuality, was kind of positioned as like the most extreme form of male homosexuality. It wasn't just that, some guy was swishy. It was that he really wanted to be a woman.
Mother, how would you like a daughter?
What are you talking about?
Yeah, it was seen as on a continuum where transsexuality was a more extreme manifestation of a kind of gay gender, queerness.
That seems to be the case here on Soap. The writing, at least in the first half of the first season, is pretty inconsistent. Sometimes Jody's presented as a gay man, sometimes as a trans woman. Audiences didn't always get that there was a difference between the two. That's a misconception that queer people had to repeatedly fight against, even a decade later.
Gender identity, which is what am I a man or a woman? Then there's sexual orientation, which is who do I love, men or women? They're two different things.
I also spoke to Dr. Ada Rhodes Short, co-host of the podcast Totally Trans, about how shows back then had a way of mixing up sexual orientation and gender identity.
The initial gay liberation movement kind of taking off in the early 70s, we're seeing all these people just not understanding how to describe things and then projecting out their misunderstood understanding to America as a whole, and Jody is just a really good example of that.
Now I get used to a guy who's now a girl who likes guys and not girls. We used to be a guy who liked guys and not girls. Give me up. I mean, maybe, when you guys were still in the closet, maybe it wasn't easy on you, but it was a hell of a lot easier on us.
This is clearly someone looking at like homosexuality and misunderstanding it and being like, this is trans femininity. And then drawing on these tropes that we see from like Dog Day Afternoon and the Christine Jorgensen story and any other representation that we had at the time.
So should we call Jody trans, or gay, or both, or neither? Here's Dr. Short's take.
And it's this thing where I just want to look at Jody and be like, you are clearly super fucking trans, because nobody looks at their boyfriend and is like, well, he likes girls, so I should just become a girl. That's not a cis person's thought process.
But Dr. Short points out that's not the only way to look at Jody.
I think when you're talking about a fictional character, whatever the right way to talk about them is the way that makes you feel good and feel seen. So if you look at a character and you see a reflection of your own story, it's okay to own that character and say, this is my family, this is me, this is my story, even if the language isn't great.
And as Dr. Stryker points out, Jody's depiction isn't all bad.
So I would have to say it represented progress of a certain kind, in that the Jody character is meant to be sympathetic.
Just think of me as a person, that's all. I mean, that's all I am. I'm a person sitting here. Bert, look at me. I'm a person who happens to like men.
The audience is supposed to identify with Jody as a person who has, a life to live, and that they should be happy, and it's that they're doing this thing that they think will make their life better.
From now on, I'll try to look at you as a person.
And I'll try and look at you the same way.
But on the other hand, there's an awful lot of stereotyping that was going on in those episodes, and Jody being gay or trans is definitely made into the butt of the joke.
If anyone's interested, I've thought it over, and I've definitely decided to go ahead with a sex change operation.
Even if ultimately we're supposed to be sympathetic, it's like we earn that sympathy after we've had a lot of, yucks at the expense of the trans character.
Queer storylines were still very much a work in progress in the late 70s, but this was at least a baseline, a place to start. And by the way, I'll be posting more clips of my interviews with Dr. Short and Dr. Stryker over on Patreon. To Soap's credit, the Jody character gets significantly deeper in the next storyline. Halfway through season 1, Jody goes to a hospital to get that, quote, sex change operation. At first, it seems like it's going to be played for laughs, especially when Jody meets his roommate, Barney, who's there for a heart operation.
I'm in for a sex change.
What do you want to change sex? If I remember correctly, it was pretty terrific.
By the way, if Barney looks familiar, that's because it's Rose's boyfriend from the Golden Girls, Miles. Anyway, when he's waiting for surgery, Jody's boyfriend Dennis, the football player, comes to visit him. Dennis confesses that he's planning to marry a woman, not because he loves her, but for publicity. And he doesn't want Jody in his life anymore.
Jody, I'm sorry.
Oh, I love it. The homosexual and the starlet are getting married. You'll kill each other fighting over the electric rollers.
Jody's pretty upset. We normally think of Billy Crystal for his comedic roles, but his performance here of a broken heart is really moving.
Okay, I'm fine. I am fine.
Then the show goes even further. After Dennis walks out, Jody doesn't want to go ahead with the operation. In fact, he doesn't want to go on living.
It's checkout time. Make life a lot easier for me. Mom, Bert, Anita Bryant.
He finds an unattended cart of pills and takes them all, then lies down, ready to die. And that's when Barney finds him. Barney doesn't know about the pills, but he overheard Dennis leaving Jody. He sits down next to his friend and tells him a story about how he was once married to a woman he loved, and when she died, he never thought that he'd be happy again.
There was a lot of pain. I never thought I'm ever going to fall in love again.
A few years went by, and one day Barney met another woman who made him happy. Not in the same way, a different kind of happy, but it still felt amazing.
One day I noticed, I laughed. Then another day I hummed. And then soon after, I sang.
Then, after 10 more happy years, she passed away too. Once again, Barney thought he'd never be happy again.
Well, it's never going to happen again. Once was wonderful. Twice was incredible. A third time? Well, you're kidding yourself. Come on. Third time would be asking for a miracle.
But then he says he doesn't really believe that. If he believed it, then he wouldn't be getting his heart fixed, because, he tells Jody, there's always going to be another chance to be happy.
Listen, my kid, I know that you don't feel so terrific right now, but wait, Jody. Someday, I guarantee you, you're gonna hear somebody laughing, and you'll turn around, and it'll be you.
Jody closes his eyes, and that's the end of the episode. We don't know what happens next. It's a pretty incredible scene. When I first saw the show, I was a teenager and feeling pretty sad and alone too. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear somebody say that someday I'd feel better. And sure enough, Barney turned out to be right. The next week, Jody's family gets the news about him, and they rush to the hospital.
It was a hospital. Jody tried to kill himself.
No.
When they get to the hospital, they burst into Jody's room, and they find out he's gonna be okay.
That story you told me really made me want to live.
This whole storyline marks a big turnaround for the Jody character, giving him lots more depth and a sympathetic side that he simply didn't have at first. And that was only the beginning of the changes. Later that season, Jody meets a woman named Carol who's hell-bent on making him straight. This was a storyline that the head of ABC had alluded to, the one that gay groups were worried would end with Jody being cured of homosexuality. At first, Jody resists Carol's advances.
Carol, there's not going to be any romance here.
Why?
I'm a homosexual, remember?
But Carol keeps pressing Jody for a date. After a lot of cajoling, eventually he gives in, and they have sex. The next morning, he's mad.
But I'm gay.
That's debatable.
Now at this point, it seems like Jody might be bisexual. But this is another moment that the show kind of fumbles, because that's never even floated as a possibility. The word bisexual never comes up. It's just a big mystery how Jody could have relationships with both men and women.
And what does this make me? Imagine how confused my hormones are.
It's not like bisexuality was unknown in the late 1970s. Taxi had an episode with a bisexual character just 2 years later.
You know anything about bisexuals?
Well, of course, they are very popular in my country.
They are?
One of our favorite sports is racing them. We have special racks where we chain them up at night.
I'm not talking about bicycles. I'm talking about bisexuals.
So am I.
Elton John had talked about being bisexual a year earlier, and David Bowie before that.
If I said I was bisexual, that's enough.
Does that mean, though, that you really are, or does that mean that you're keeping some kind
I've
of...
answered the question.
Right, okay.
I don't know why soap doesn't raise bisexuality as a possibility, but Jody steadfastly maintains throughout the show that he's a homosexual, especially when he's talking to Carol.
Listen, the other night was nice. It really was, and I've told you that. But I'm still gay.
But as season 2 opens, Carol's got some news for him.
I'm just pregnant with your child.
This starts a new storyline for Jody that would come to be the defining arc of his character, and also reflect a new understanding of gay issues in real life. A gay dad seems totally normal today, but back then, the concept was shocking. Even Jody's stunned at first.
It's yours.
How can you be sure?
Jody, you were the only one.
But it was only once.
That'll do it.
But he's committed to raising the baby with Carol. He even plans to marry her. But Carol skips town. Jody tracks her down in Texas at her mother's house. And here's how the mother greets Jody.
We don't have homos in Texas. Live ones, anyway.
That is a chilling line. Jody's taking a big risk coming here, and he's doing it because he's trying to do the right thing. But Carol tells him that she doesn't want her kid to have a gay dad.
Jody, I don't want you to be the baby's father.
What?
Someday I hope to marry. And whoever I marry will be the baby's father.
A year ago, the Jody character was just a punchline. Now, just like Newt Dieter had recommended, Jody's become a complex, assertive gay character. He's living openly and honestly, and he's determined to parent that way too.
Carol, it's a mistake. It's a gigantic mistake because it's a lie. And a lie will always catch up with you later.
A few episodes after this confrontation, Carol gives birth to a girl she names Wendy, and then immediately abandons the baby. Carol's mother drops Wendy off with Jody, and it's clear that he's a devoted, loving father from the very first moment that he holds her.
It was so much easier when I didn't know anything about you. Because now that I've seen you, and now that I've held you, I never want to let you go.
Given the commonly held belief at the time that gays were a threat to kids, this was a pretty remarkable depiction. Not only is Jody a gay man raising a daughter, but the show's taking a bold stance that it's possible for a gay dad to be a better parent than a straight mom. Even more remarkable is that Jody is co-parenting with his friend Alice, who's a lesbian. 2 gay parents, or in the vernacular of the time,
Jody was my first homo.
No, Mrs. David, I'm still a homo.
But you're with a girl. Well, we're both homos.
But Jody's qualities as a parent were about to be put to the test with his biggest challenge yet, and another milestone for queer people both on TV and in real life. Midway through season 3, Carol returns. She has a new boyfriend, and they want to take Wendy away.
I raised this child. I'm the one who got her through teething and colic and crying in the night. I'm all the family she has. She stays with me.
Okay, I'm taking you to court.
But even though Carol abandoned Wendy and Jody raised her, everyone knows that he has almost no chance of retaining custody because of the stigma at the time. Just a few years earlier, Anita Bryant's whole campaign was about saving children from gay people. And in California, Harvey Milk had just barely defeated the Briggs Initiative, a bill that would have prohibited people even suspected of being gay from working in schools. And just a year earlier, an episode of Alice had hinged on whether it was safe for a kid to spend time around a gay friend of the family.
Why aren't you letting Tommy go? Is it because I'm gay?
Yes.
A mid-70s poll from NBC found that 57% of Americans believed that homosexuality was a mental illness. 52% believed it was immoral. I couldn't even find polling from that time about gay parents because the concept was so novel. One of the earliest surveys to ask about it was a Pew survey in 1997 that found only 6% of Americans thought that gays and lesbians raising kids was a good thing. Pew surveys wouldn't find a majority support for same-sex adoption until sometime around 2010. When this soap storyline began, no US court had ever granted custody to a gay parent. Here's what happens when Jody tries to hire a lawyer.
I'm a good father and she's a lousy mother.
Doesn't matter. She's the mother. You'll be laughed out of court.
But that's my daughter.
You're a homosexual.
You're a coward.
What?
The case goes to court, and sure enough, when Carol takes the stand, she lies, playing into the prejudices about gay people being dangerous.
A group of homosexuals threatened to kill me if I ever came back for her again.
That's a lie, my God!
And she brings her mother to the stand and makes her lie too.
I went to Jody's apartment, and there was this woman there with some men, and she said that if I didn't get out of there in 10 seconds, they were going to beat the living hell out of me.
Even though none of that is true, Jody knows that the court will believe the lies about him before they'll believe the truth. He takes the stand, heartbroken, and has one last speech before he knows he's going to lose his daughter.
I've proven, at least to myself, what kind of father I am. And whether Wendy lives with me or not, at least she'll know that I've always wanted her and that I'll always be there for her. If you all excuse me, I'm going home.
I don't think witnesses are allowed to excuse themselves, but it's such a good speech, who would stop him? And that's the cliffhanger where season 3 ends, with Jody not knowing if he'll ever see his daughter again. There's another reason the story was particularly groundbreaking, and that's because of something that had just happened in real life. A few months before the start of this season, 2 lesbian moms in Washington became the first same-sex couple in US history to win a custody battle. Sandy Schuster and Madeline Isaacson were both stuck in unhappy marriages until one day they met and fell in love at a Pentecostal church. When they both left their husbands to be together, courts initially would only let them keep their kids if they agreed to stop living together. and that was followed by numerous rounds of legal challenges, and then finally, in May of 1979, the case was finally resolved in their favor. Gay parenting was still a deeply controversial topic. Around this time, a New York legal center for lesbian moms estimated that gay and lesbian parents lost 98% of their custody cases. But the tide had at least finally started to turn, and viewers could see this new reality playing out for the first time on soap. But what nobody knew was whether Jody's case was going to work out in his favor, until season 4 premiered on November 14th, 1980. At first, it doesn't look good for Jody. The judge is prepared to rule in Carol's favor.
It has become apparent to me over these many years that an infant needs the kind of care that can best be given to it by its mother.
But then the judge drops a bombshell. The night before, Carol's mother had called the judge to confess that they lied about Jody.
I have decided to break with normal tradition and award custody of the infant Wendy to her father, Jody Dallas.
Listen to that studio applause. And it wasn't just the audience there on the day who were relieved by this win. In the lead up to season 4, ABC ran a poll for viewers to vote on how they wanted the custody case to go. And the audience supported Jody by a margin of 3-1.
America, in this poll, wanted Jody to have the baby. And I thought that was the victory. I thought that was the big thing, was that they trusted a gay man with a child in this poll that ABC did.
The conclusion of this storyline was the culmination of years of work, of the gay activists like Newt Dieter and Ginny Vita who pushed the show to humanize the gay character, of Billy Crystal's insistence that the character be more than a collection of stereotypes, and of all the writing that Susan Harris had done to give the character depth. Not only was Jody finally reunited with his daughter and free to raise her openly and honestly as a gay dad, but he could do it supported by an overwhelming majority of the audience. As Susan Harris put it, Billy Crystal took a brutally difficult role, a dangerous part, a character that is the butt of jokes in this country, and made him warm and lovable and funny. Billy made Jody Dallas someone people root for. And as Billy said after the episode aired, that is the great payoff for the series.
And I was really proud of what we did on the show.
It was an extremely satisfying conclusion to his character's years-long arc. And then, soap got a little silly. Around this time, soap started veering into stories that were more about gimmicks than characters. There's a storyline about an alien abduction, the family gets swept up in a South American revolution, Wendy gets kidnapped by ninjas, Jody gets hypnotized into living as a 90-year-old man, and after all that great payoff for the Jody character, season 4 was more about wacky premises. Meanwhile, there was more trouble on the horizon. Conservative groups led by Donald Wildman had started applying more pressure on advertisers as the show went on, and sponsors were dropping out. According to one executive, the show lost $3 million a year because ABC had to sell ad time at a steep discount.
The controversy really never ended in 4 years.
The last year we went on without any sponsorship because it was so controversial.
At this point, Susan said the only sponsor still with the show was Vlasic Pickles, and things were about to get even worse. At the start of season 4, Donald Wildman was planning a new round of protests, now with the backing of Jerry Falwell. Falwell was a huge religious force. His support had helped Ronald Reagan win the presidency just a few days before the airing of Jody's custody win. Falwell had pledged $2 million and his 3 million followers to support Wildman's boycott efforts.
The focus on the family was still right on our you-know-whats.
Wildman had an early victory over the summer of 1981 when Procter & Gamble, the biggest advertiser on TV, announced that they would drop ads from 50 shows deemed inappropriate. This was a huge deal. Procter & Gamble spent $250 million on TV advertising, equivalent to nearly $1 billion today. Owen Butler, the chairman of Procter & Gamble, said, "We think the coalition is expressing very important and broadly held views about gratuitous sex, violence, and profanity. I can assure you that we are listening very carefully to what they say." Shows that were seen as daring before suddenly looked like a huge liability to the networks. Season 4 ends with a dramatic cliffhanger, the main character in front of a firing squad, and we'll never know what happened next because ABC pulled the plug on soap. Even with a decline in advertisers, it was still a surprise for the writers who had ideas for where soap could go next, but they'd never get to put them on the screen. Instead, Susan, Tony, and Paul focused on Benson, a spin-off of Soap, and tried to get some new shows going. But there were a string of flops over the next few years. There was I'm a Big Girl Now, which brought in some of the cast from Soap, but it was canceled after a year. Then there was It Takes Two, which also got canceled after its first year. And then a show called Hail to the Chief, about the first woman president of the United States. Like with Soap, that show featured a gay character in the main cast as the president's Secret Service agent.
And then when my father found out when I was in college, he never again could look at me.
Even now?
Now particularly, he's dead.
That one had heavy network interference and lasted just 7 episodes. It was a difficult time for Susan, Tony, and Paul, who kept trying to make new shows work and writing gay characters where they could, but didn't manage to find success. Until the fall of 1985.
Thank you for being a friend.
The Golden Girls was an instant smash hit. Not only did it include a gay character in the pilot,
We can't afford to buy a house. What do we have for collateral? A gay cook?
but Susan saw to it that the show tackled even more queer topics in its 7-year run, from coming out to gay marriage to HIV and safe sex and more.
I'm so proud to have worked with Susan, Paul, and Tony on such amazing and iconic projects. That was joyful for me.
And whatever happened to Donald Wildman? Well, after he convinced Procter & Gamble to drop ads in '81, his next target was an upcoming NBC show called Love, Sydney, which starred Tony Randall as a gay man. Wildman launched a boycott of NBC's parent company, RCA, but during that time, the company's profits went up. The boycott had no effect whatsoever, and Wildman's credibility was shot. In fact, in the years that followed, gay characters started appearing on more and more shows. On The Love Boat, on Night Court, on Cagney and Lacey, with a complex recurring character on Dynasty, which is a story for a future video. Conservative pressure on TV was fading, and over the coming decades, we'd see more and more queer characters. Until now, what was once the most controversial show on TV seems fairly tame.
I'm really proud of what we did. As flawed as some of the moments were, you know, I always look back on it and go, we did something, you know, important there. I'm proud that we did this character while the Will and Grace actors were in elementary school.
Mm-hmm. In researching this video, I came across lots more great stories about the jokes that ABC made soap cut from the pilot, about the time Billy Crystal was shot at while performing, and about how one of the biggest groups that protested soap turned out to be fake. Check out those bonus videos over at patreon.com/mattbaum, and big thanks to everyone who makes these videos possible. Now, if you'll excuse me.
All right, that's it. I've had it. I'm leaving.